It was a warm and bright Saturday morning when a man named Gerald decided to visit the city zoo. Gerald was a cheerful fellow who loved animals of all kinds. He had a playful personality and always looked for adventure. Gerald also wore a wig, because he had lost most of his hair years ago, and he preferred to keep his head covered. He chose a stylish brown wig that looked neat and confident, and he never left the house without it. The zoo was crowded with families and children running from exhibit to exhibit. Gerald purchased a ticket and stepped inside with excitement. He admired the giraffes bending their long necks toward leafy branches, and he laughed as the playful otters splashed in the water. He stopped to eat some popcorn while watching the lions resting in the sun. The day was going perfectly when Gerald reached the aviary section. He entered a large open enclosure filled with tropical birds. The staff encouraged visitors to walk slowly and enjoy the birds flying freely around them. Gerald looked up in wonder. The sky inside the aviary was alive with parrots, macaws, cockatoos, and tiny finches. The colors were dazzling. Red, green, yellow, and blue feathers shimmered in the sunlight streaming through the mesh roof. Gerald stood still with a smile on his face. A large parrot perched on a nearby branch cocked its head and studied him. Its feathers were emerald green with a golden chest and a bright curved beak. The parrot let out a loud squawk that startled a few children. Gerald chuckled and said, "Well, hello there, friend." He had no idea that this bird was not only curious but also mischievous. As Gerald leaned closer to admire the parrot, it suddenly launched into the air with a burst of wings. Before Gerald could react, the parrot swooped down and landed right on his head. With shocking speed, it grabbed his wig in its beak and claws and yanked it off. Gerald gasped as the bird flapped hard and took flight. Again, wig dangling like a captured flag, the parrot soared above the enclosure. The crowd erupted in laughter. Some people pointed while others shouted. The children screamed with joy as if watching a circus act. Gerald reached up to his bare head in horror. His wig was gone, and he stood completely bald in the middle of the aviary. He shouted, "Hey, give that back!" But the parrot only squawked louder and flew in circles above the crowd. The bird perched on a high branch with the wig hanging awkwardly from its beak. The wig swayed back and forth like a strange trophy. The parrot began to tug at it, biting strands of hair and shaking its head. The sight made everyone laugh even harder. Someone shouted, "Look, the parrot has better style than we do." Another person joked that the parrot must have wanted a disguise. Gerald turned red with embarrassment, pleaded with the zookeeper nearby, "Please, can you help me get it back?" The zookeeper tried to keep a straight face, but it was impossible not to smile. He assured Gerald that they would retrieve the wig. He clapped his hands and whistled, trying to coax the parrot down. But the bird was enjoying the attention too much. The parrot hopped along the branch and placed the wig on its own head. Crooked and upside down it made. The parrot looked like a wild feathered man wearing a lopsided hairstyle. The entire crowd roared with laughter. Children clapped their hands and shouted, "Encore! Encore!" The parrot tilted its head proudly, as though it had planned the comedy act all along. Gerald covered his shiny bald head with his hands. He muttered to himself, "This cannot be happening." He wished he could disappear into the ground. He tried tossing a piece of popcorn into the air to distract the parrot, but the bird ignored. The parrot was far too pleased with its new fashion statement. At last, the zookeeper called in another staff member with a small bucket of fruit. They walked slowly under the tree, offering grapes and slices of apple. The parrot's eyes lit up. It dropped the wig carelessly onto the ground and swooped down for the food. The zookeeper quickly scooped up the wig and returned it to Gerald. When Gerald held it in his hands, he saw that it was ruffled and covered with bits of feathers and beak marks. He sighed heavily and tried to pat it back into shape. The crowd cheered as if he had won a battle against the bird. Gerald placed the wig back on his head, but it sat crooked and uneven. He looked into the reflection of a glass window and groaned. It was ruined. Still, despite his embarrassment, Gerald began to chuckle. The ridiculousness of the moment sank in. He realized that everyone would remember this day, not for the lions or giraffes, but for the parrot that stole a wig. He smiled at the families who were still laughing and bowed as though he had been part of the show. The crowd applauded once more. On his way out of the aviary, Gerald overheard children talking excitedly about the parrot with the wig. They were telling the story to strangers as though it were the greatest thing they had ever seen. Gerald shook his head and laughed. He admitted to himself that sometimes life gave you silly adventures when you least expected them. When Gerald finally arrived home that evening, he placed the battered wig on his dresser, considered throwing it away, but then he decided to keep it as a reminder. Whenever he looked at it, he would remember the day he learned that even a parrot could outsmart him at the zoo. And although he had started the day hoping for a peaceful visit, he ended it with one of the funniest memories of his life.